body doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Well, neither does the brain. So the brain panics and says, "What the hell is this?" So it converts it from a toxic chemical to a less toxic chemical through the natural opioid receptors in our brain, the reward center. And it converts it into a chemical they found called THIQ, which we're now dubbing the alcoholic chemical. So THIQ works a lot like insulin does. And when it's created in the brain and we're drinking, the more that's created, the more ravenously thirsty we become for that alcohol.
Welcome to Shaping the Basin. I am here with Kurtis Mize. Did I say
Yes,
your last name correctly?
absolutely. Yep.
Nice. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I am originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I wound up in Southern Oregon through the recovery process. Just full disclosure, I'm an alcoholic. So I started my recovery journey in what we affectionately call Elephant Fart, Nevada, which is Pahrump. Sorry about that. Which is Pahrump, Nevada. Basically, it was a spiritual based program because that's kind of what you do when you don't have insurance is you join a cult. So they set me way out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert with no phone, TV, nothing like that, just a Bible. So I ended up studying the Bible under there, and it's called U Turn for Christ. And they ended up having one in Grants Pass, Oregon. So I was like, I would rather live in Southern Oregon. Even growing up in Vegas, I never got used to the heat. So it was always miserable. So gladly, I moved to Grants Pass, and that was in 2019. And I've been in Southern Oregon ever since.
Okay. So you went to Grants Pass, and then how did you get to Klamath?
That also has to do with a lot of recovery. In my own journey, relapse had a lot to do with it. So I was basically a chronic relapser. So when I ended up relapsing in Grants Pass, I moved to Medford, relapsed in Medford, moved back to Grants Pass. And what had happened was I was living in a sober living community within Grants Pass and had relapsed again, and they were about to kick me out of that place. So instead, they asked me if I wanted to try residential, like a 90-day residential inpatient treatment. So I said yes to that, and they kept me in the CRC, which is the um, Crisis Resolution Center in Grants Pass for 6 weeks until a bed opened up somewhere, and it wound up being at Transformations Wellness Center at Klamath Falls.
Okay.
I had it in my intention to go back to Grants Pass. However, there was a lot of resources to plug into here. And I also found a place that would let me live there, a sober living, rent free, as long as I worked or went to school. And that was my goal, was to go to school. So I plugged into Klamath Community College from there and wound up staying. And I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the area.
Thanks.
Um, you started out right off by saying you were an alcoholic, and then you mentioned the chronic relapsing.
Mhm.
Uh, how long were you an alcoholic? I don't know if that's the right way to ask that question, but
It,
how long were you battling that?
It's
Or
it's a fair way to answer that question. I was battling it pretty much since I was 19 years old. It probably started a little bit sooner than that. However, at 19, 20 years old is when I noticed it was really becoming like an alcoholic way of drinking. To get blackout drunk every single night, or at least every other night, is the way that it went for a long time there, almost about 17 years, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, so how it started was, and I'll mention this part of my story because it might be in correlation to something that might come up in this conversation. But I was a quiet kid, um, very reserved, not so much shy, but just kind of kept to myself a little bit. And when they took me in for a psychiatry appointment when I was about 14, 15 years old, they noticed high depression, high intelligence. So I was very much to myself. I had a couple friends. I lived pretty normal childhood, but however, when I got into high school, that had changed dramatically. I started to pick up the bass guitar and join theater, and that really brought me out of my shell. So what happened as a result of that is I acquired a lot of friends. So a big social network, a big connection. And by all intents and purposes, maybe popular at the time. So that was a dramatic shift in my life in which I was really involved in it. It really transformed my life to for the better. um, After a while, that partying and that drinking and that kind of rock and roll lifestyle had shifted just basically into me drinking wine every night alone. And my friends started to see that. So at about 20 years old, my life as I knew it at the time came kind of crashing down. So that was a hard hit for me. And I finally just kind of accepted, like, well, if they're not going to want to hang out with me or I don't have friends or a life anymore, then I'll just take up drinking. And I didn't see, I didn't know what it would actually turn into at the
Mm.
time, sitting here at 40 years old talking about it still to this day. So,
Yeah. Um, when you relapsed several times,
mhm.
so there was obviously at some point a desire to stop drinking. Was that internal or like something you recognized it was a problem and you wanted to stop?
Yeah, it definitely was internal. At about 25 years old, I was having a conversation with one of my friends on the phone, and I started to get really heroic and saying amazing things like, "Oh, I want to get my heart back," and just stuff like that. And finally said, "Okay, I'm ready to stop drinking." And so I took the rest of my Mad Dog 2020s and I poured it over the fence and poured it all out, said bye, hung up the phone with her. And that was the first time I felt alcoholism. um, that was when, after I got off the phone with her, I felt it in my sternum, kind of that anxious feeling like, oh no, what did I do? I'm not ready to quit tonight. Kind of like something I would visit periodically was the feeling of being in the middle of a drunk and then running out. So that was the first time I think I felt alcoholic. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh no, this isn't just going to be about willpower, is it? It's going to be something else entirely.
Oh yeah. So it's not willpower. You have to have, I'm assuming you have to have a system that is set up to help you quit drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it goes way deeper than just sobriety. I'm coming to find out. I'm currently 19 months sober on this duration of treatments. So I've come far, and I've come in to find out that throughout my drinking career, and that drinking problem that everybody was telling me that I actually had very little to do with the alcohol. I kind of figured I had a Curtis problem, whatever that may be, and I just happened to be drinking during the Curtis problem. So what I've come to find out is there's a very distinguishable difference between sobriety and recovery. And I like to expound on that to this day to people who are wondering, because I can take the drink out of my hand, but the only difference between me and 92% of the world to where it's just a beverage, what separates me is my behavior. So if you take the drink out of my hand, but I'm still lying, cheating, stealing, manipulating, whatever my flavor of misbehavior is, then I'm just really holding off on the drink for the sake of holding off. So in sobriety, we pretty much achieve that on end or around day 4. And then you don't really get any more sober from there. So it's kind of, you have to ask yourself, now what? What does that mean? And luckily for me, what I found after I asked that, was able to ask that question to myself, was an exciting feeling. Like I was about to get my life back and not getting in my way anymore. So what do I want my life to look like? So that became much more exciting, that recovery process, in comparison to the sobriety process, because there's a reason why we drank a lot or used substances a lot. It was comfortable, it was numbing, it was a defense mechanism.
Mhm.
So, of course, I wouldn't want to quit something that gives me that.
Yeah.
So, just giving up the drink and taking that just by itself is hard and really not exciting.
Mhm.
So, the sobriety journey is one thing, the recovery is something completely different.
Uh, it sounds almost like the sobriety part is what you're giving up, but the recovery part is what you're gaining, right?
Exactly.
What the life that you're building instead of the life you're giving up.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good
Yeah.
way of putting it. Yeah. I started to look in a different direction because for the past few times that I've tried treatment and recovery, it was just worrying about abstaining from alcohol. And one thing that I told myself, which sounded like an irrational fear, actually is a rational fear now, is that, well, what if life still sucks? It just sucks without alcohol. That is true. Life sometimes sucks, it
Mhm.
ebbs and it flows. But the thing about quitting alcohol and gaining strength and transcending yourself is being able to sit through those problems. My
Mhm.
favorite poet, Bukowski, put it like this: it's how well you walk through the fire is
Mhm.
what matters most. So I'm able to kind of sit in feelings. I've gathered coping skills along the way to help me with, when life ebbs instead of flows.
Mhm.
So it's much easier. And what I've also found out during my own recovery is that showing up is 90% of the work on anything. As long as I took my ass and just implanted it somewhere, the universe will meet me there,
Mhm.
and it just becomes that easy. And if I would have known if it was that easy all along, I probably would have tried a little bit sooner, but that's not the way that my story went.
It's easy to get lost. Don't know which path to take, what to post. In the social media jungle, video is king. Your kids are obsessed, your customers are addicted, we're all hooked, and social media sites prioritize videos. So when you're ready to stand out from the crowd, reach out to 40 Deuce Films. Feeling over everything.
What are some of the you said you're 19 months sober
Mhm.
this time. Congratulations,
Thank you.
by the way. That's exciting. Um, what are some of the things that you've done over the last 19 months to stay in that recovery when life has gotten hard?
Well, what they tell us, and they've told us this for a long time, is what it takes for a person in the hopeless condition of alcohol is a vital spiritual experience. And that goes beyond AA. It was said by Carl Jung, I believe, way back in the early 1900s, where he was observing alcoholics and going, there's no cure, there's no treatment. They pretty much are hopeless. However, if they happen to have a vital spiritual experience, that could be something that they saw positive results in. And AA calls it a spiritual awakening. And you could call it whatever you would like, really. It's just, to me, it's a psychic change. And what happened with me, excuse me, while I was in the CRC, sitting there, I happened to have had one of those revelations where I started to write in a journal, writing notes to people that I loved, writing the passwords to all my technology advices or devices. And I was really at that low where we're about in the middle of this movie and it doesn't appear to be getting any better. Sometimes people walk out of the theater on that movie. I was contemplating that at the time. Um, but then the revelation hit me like positivity is a choice, and it is as easy and as difficult as that. From what I found out through this moment of my sobriety and recovery is that I had to capitulate. I wasn't God. I know, what a stark revelation. I was surprised too. But I am not God, so I don't control pretty much 99% of the things. Anything happening outside of the skin, I don't have control over. And that's something that I find common in alcoholics and addicts alike, is that we like to try and control things. I don't control what happens to me. I don't control outcomes. I don't control other people and their responses or reactions. What I do control is I don't play God, I play narrator. So it's not so much what happens to me, but where I decide to file it inside of my head. And before I realized I was telling myself a very melodramatic story, a very woe is me type thing. And I was using that for self justification to remain drinking. If I just decided to not tell that story, but to change my own narrative in my life and try to choose positivity, well, then now I've created a great buffer between me and substance abuse. And after that, I kind of taken it and run with it. And it's not easy. It's not something like as easy as it sounds. Positivity is a choice. Just choose to be positive. It goes much deeper than that. However, it is just as easy and as difficult as that, making the choice. and
Yeah.
moving forward on a positive mindset. That's
Mhm.
what really helps me cope.
Okay. Can you tell me what that's like in like real time? Like I love the concept,
Mhm.
but I'm just curious, like something happens to you in a day. What is that? Is there like an internal dialogue that goes through your mind? Do you have to talk yourself through it or is it just happen naturally?
The biggest part for me was just stopping, don't react. So I look up to Stoicism, the Stoic philosophers. And what Stoicism means is basically you feel the emotion because they're valid, right? You can go ahead and feel the emotion, but try not to react to it, at least right away. And that's what I was doing. I was very impulsive. So, for a real time description of that, would have been the last time that I relapsed. I was trying to get into school in Rogue Community College to become a drug and alcohol counselor. So I went to this place called Options for Southern Oregon, and they had a peer support in there that was going to help me gain the finances and find my route to school. However, I went into that office that morning, and I guess I had some outstanding loans not in default, or however that was put. Anyway, I couldn't get finances to go to school. So I took that right away as an ultimate defeat. And I was saying things in my mind like, oh, what if I'm just going to be working at a gas station for 14 hours a week, and they're not letting me get a hold of my own life. So I walked right out of that office and directly across the street to a Safeway. I happened to have not had money at the time, but I had a backpack, so they were very kind to give me some wine donations on that day.
Hmm.
And I commenced the relapse. So after that relapse came to light, I entered the CRC where I was awaiting my bed and treatment. Well, I have at the same time had been going through some legal issues as well. So I'm sitting there in the CRC. I have no phone, no communication with the outside world. I'm just taking a respite as I await my bed. But then at the same time on the same day, I got two letters. One was from my lawyer saying, "Don't worry about it. We got it. It's just turned into a violation, not any bigger than a parking ticket. Pay me 50 bucks and we're good." I was like, okay, that took care of itself. And then I got a letter from the Department of Education saying, "We put your loans in a default. Go ahead and go to school."
Okay.
If I would have just waited instead of reacting impulsively to that, it ended up working itself out.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably could have been doing whatever I'm doing right now a little bit sooner. However, I'm also glad that I have that experience because I can be able to tell people and share that experience with other people to hopefully provide some support and some hope
Yeah.
as they're contemplating their own trip through recovery. Like things will just work themselves out. I think it was Young too who put it in a way of what we resist persists.
Mhm.
So if I'm fighting against something that I already cannot control, I'm only going to be met with more resistance.
Right.
So I tried, and they call this DBT skill radical acceptance or riding the wave. And it's basically like, can you control it? No. Okay. Well, then it's not in your concern.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so now you're going to school
Yeah.
currently
Yeah.
uh, to help others.
Yeah, absolutely. To become, I'm doing my last term right now in order to complete my pathway certificate to become a certified drug and alcohol counselor. And from there, I have the resources in my back pocket to continue if I wish for the next few years to obtain more on the psychology side of things. So I'd like to broaden my horizons beyond substance abuse counseling because in the end what we're seeing in the future, what the future holds, is that it's all going to be co-diagnosis where we have a dual diagnosis, coexisting disorders where what's addiction if not a mental illness anyway. But usually what we find with substance abuse is that there's an underlying thing and a factor that's going on beneath it. So that's going to take some mental health in order to try to trim and find the root of
Mhm.
the actual problem.
That's uh, yeah. How do you get to like? So you're at a college right now.
Hmm.
You're doing that, and obviously have this uh, personal experience.
Yeah.
What other kind of training do you go through to to help others?
The biggest is that lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
From the outside looking in, and we call them affectionately normies. So 92% of the world who alcohol is just a beverage. From the outside looking in, it looks simple. You have a drinking problem, quit drinking. It's like, oh, what a novel concept. I wish I would have thought of that. I try to garner a little bit of understanding from where they're coming from because it is a weird disease. From the outside looking in, you can't really um, figure it all out. And even when you're within the disease and the addiction, it's hard for me to even figure out what was going on with me. So really that lived experience is if somebody's coming into an office seeking counseling for substance abuse, it usually helps if the person on the other side of the desk has that same type of experience to know where you're coming from. Otherwise, it just sounds insane, which it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's insanity. We do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results,
Mm-hmm.
and it just doesn't work. So the lived experience has a lot to do with that. There are counselors that don't necessarily come from that background, which I see the benefit in that too, because we get to peer inside of the other side of it, the people that we inadvertently hurt during our addiction, and that's important to get that perspective as well. But the lived experience goes a long way. It's probably about 90% of it, in my estimation, in my opinion. The other training that you get is I just finished an internship. So that real life sitting down and talking or facilitating a group, you really don't know if you're going to like it. You really don't know if you're going to be good at it unless you actually dive in. And I got the chance for 11 weeks to dive into that. Luckily, if I think I found my knack.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to like this career. I think
Yeah.
I'm going to be pretty good at it. Um, a lot of it comes down to just that lived experience. So we can really, I've done a lot of study myself just on my own research, trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And the book smarts and the academics of it really help me collect my lived experience and allows me to disseminate it into bite-sized discernible pieces,
Mm-hmm.
which is important. But yeah, nothing really kicks that lived experience. That's 90% of it.
You might ask yourself, when is the best time to start saving for retirement? The answer is simple. It's today. Dan Hernandez, your Klamath Falls Edward Jones financial advisor, is here to help. He will work with you to help build a plan for your ideal retirement by identifying your unique goals and help you keep on track to achieve them. The sooner you get started, the better. Call Dan Hernandez at 541-273-7132 to schedule an appointment today. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
I've often wondered when it comes to like alcoholism versus people that abuse other drugs or drugs. Is it? I'm wondering about how socially acceptable alcohol is. Does that make it a little bit harder at all to recover for alcoholism? Because it seems like everywhere you look, people are like, I had a rough day. I'm going to have a glass of wine. Does that play into it at all, do you think? That,
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And that's what makes it harder specifically for the alcoholic, I think, is it's so ubiquitous. It's conventional. Like I said, 92% of the world is just a beverage. It's not a big deal. But to 8% of us globally that are clinically diagnosed AUD, alcohol use disorder, we're powerless over it. We have a neurological disorder and we were predisposed genetically, I believe, to become an alcoholic had we chose that path. So yeah, that definitely, we look at it and it's everywhere. So it's conventional. So we look at it and we go, oh, well, they're doing it. Most people are doing it. Um, so I should be able to do it, right? Well, not necessarily. I believe it's definitely the disease theory in alcoholism is what I'm finding to be true. Um, Basically, it's to me, it's the diabetes of the brain. So with a diabetic, somebody who's predisposed genetically will eat a cupcake, say whatever, some type of simple sugar, and they'll ingest it. And what happens is the pancreas will disperse insulin, and the insulin is what picks apart all of the nutrients from that simple sugar and disperse it throughout the body. However, people who are predisposed to diabetic, their pancreas will overreact, sort of, and um, secrete a superabundant amount of insulin. So when the sufficient amount of insulin is used and is necessary to disperse its nutrients, you have a lot of leftover insulin. So they're standing there going, "What the hell do we do?" Well, so it shoots a message up to the brain that makes us ravenously hungry, even though we're not. We just ate a big cupcake, right? So that happens until we become insulin resistant, and thus we're diabetic. The same kind of thing they're finding is happening in the alcoholic's brain. Somebody who's predisposed to alcoholism, our liver doesn't break down alcohol as efficiently as a normal person would. So what happens with that leftover alcohol that we're unable to break down, it turns into a very toxic chemical called acetaldehyde, and it shoots directly up to the brain. The body doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Well, neither does the brain. So the brain panics and says, "What the hell is this?" So it converts it from a toxic chemical to a less toxic chemical through the natural opioid receptors in our brain, the reward center. And it converts it into a chemical they found called THIQ, which we're now dubbing the alcoholic chemical. So THIQ works a lot like insulin does. And when it's created in the brain and we're drinking, the more that's created, the more ravenously thirsty we become for that alcohol. So, and what happens when it's developed THIQ is it never goes away in the brain once developed. Kind of sound familiar? Once an
Yeah.
alcoholic, always an alcoholic.
Right.
But through abstinence, we don't get rid of it, but it becomes manageable. It becomes just a little bit in our brain after a time. But once that has occurred and I'm neurologically alcoholic, then I can never really have a drink normally like other people again. And that's the story that our brain is telling us. That's why I lean more on the disease side.
Hmm.
And bringing that up in certain arenas is actually controversial because you take like places like NA or AA, to them, it's a spiritual malady. So they don't necessarily like to jump aboard the biological train, which is
Hmm.
fine. To me, there is no wrong way to get sober. You look at something like the 12 steps, and even in the 12 steps, only half of one step refers to substance or alcohol explicitly, only half of it. The rest, you read it, and it's about just getting your life back. That's the name of the game.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think at the end of the day, when we're looking at alcohol versus other substances, of course, alcoholics like me, I believe, are a dying breed. You could just go into AA and figure that out. It's mostly an older crowd. I think what's going on nowadays, unfortunately, is poly substance abuse. So that means we just take whatever. But at the end of the day, when you take the alcoholic and when you take the substance abuser, methamphetamine, heroin, whatever, and then you take the porn addict or the overeater or the gambler, what you come to find out is they're different drugs, same chemical. In the end of the day, we're all dopamine addicts. No matter what tool we use necessarily on the outside to manipulate that is another story. But at the end of the day, we're all working with trying to achieve the same thing with whatever it is our vice is.
Yeah. Are substance abuses in general, do you think they're on the rise? I know you just said alcoholism seems to be maybe dying, but you mentioned the other ones. Do you think there's more people addicted to things than 30 years ago?
Well, I believe that we're all addicts. The cell phone, the smartphone, is the number one dope dealer in the world. So when we're looking at that and we're playing the games or we're doing the social media or watching the porn or whatever we're doing on the phone, we're getting floods of dopamine. So I really think, evidence might show that we take somebody who can't necessarily separate themselves from the phone and put it up against the brain of an alcoholic, it might look pretty similar today.
Hmm.
So that being said, yeah, the traditional, drunk uncle is probably a dying archetype, But that's unfortunate because what that's showing us is that it's very organic substance abuse in which it'll transform and it'll adapt. We're coming out with new drugs and new forms and new, easier routes of access to gain drugs. So, yeah, it's still running rampant. And unfortunately, the success rates of even AA or evidence based therapy like DBT and CBT are going down in their success rates, especially when you look at AA. They started out talking about 90%, but that was when it started in the 30s. But when it when they had a dinner hosted by the Rockefellers, they were invited as guests. That AA was, and Bill Wilson, and that's when he stood up and made a speech, and he claimed 50 to 75% of people who really tried are successful with that. What we're seeing now is as low as 10%. And that's really hard to accurately gauge because it's the anonymity in it. And people come in and go out. It's a very revolving door, especially when it's being prescribed by judges and by medical professionals to seek AA as a treatment for their alcoholism. So we get a lot of in and out all the time. But it is as low as 10%. All the way up to, I've seen reports of up to 40%, but we're not touching even that 50%. And that's kind of striking and staggering when you think about it. But I believe that education is what we're missing. There's still a lot of stigma that revolves around the addict. When we go into ERs and hospitals and they read our docket and it just says alcohol, 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 they sometimes they just don't even want to deal with this. So there's still that stigma tied from those people on the outside looking in that don't have any understanding. I think education brings awareness to that.
Yeah.
And as we climb in deeper into this addiction study, what we're finding out, like I said, is it has very little to do with the actual substance. What we're looking at is like what Gaber Mate expressed, that 100% of his patients had trauma roots. So it's not necessarily the substance, but the pain that we're trying to mask. We need to find out what is the root of that pain. And for me, I don't subscribe too much to the childhood trauma thing because I myself would at least make that 100% statistic go down to 99.9 because I had a good childhood. What I'm finding is that there's ties to attachment, and this was also coined by Gaber Mate when he said the opposite of addiction is connection. So really, I think what we're trying to do is supplement that connection piece that's vital as a species. We're social creatures. We need that in order to get that natural baseline dopamine, in order to achieve the serotonin, the oxytocin, the things that we need to live a happy, fulfilled life. We're often missing the attachment. And that's what I see a lot of, especially in alcoholics, is isolation becomes an issue. So we need something to supplement that. And we will reach towards substances as an instant gratification to supplement that.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a ties to attachment when we're not getting the connection that's appropriate for us to live on a baseline neurological level.
I think I'm sad we're coming to the end of our time because I'm like, man, there's so much more we could talk about. But I think about in recent years just how on one hand, we have this phone in our hand and we've got hundreds of Facebook friends or whatever, and we feel really connected, but we're less connected than we've ever been. I think that pops into my brain, but we're going to have to talk about that at a different time.
Okay. Yeah. It's very synthetic, but I would be excited to talk again about it for sure.
There was just a lawsuit, I think, recently where I think it might have been Facebook was some of the social media places were found or accused of creating something that's addictive. I think I was just reading some of that in the news. So I think there's some truth to that. If you had, are there a couple tips you'd give somebody that might be wondering if they have an issue with addiction? Is there a couple things you'd tell them?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a self-diagnosis thing. They can't do a brain scan and point at the brain and go, see, there it is. There's your alcoholism right there. So it's a very self-diagnostic thing after a while. Usually, like what it's said in the big book, what Bill Wilson preferred is go ahead and go to a bar, order a drink, and then abruptly stop. And then usually what you would find if you are an alcoholic, I would suspect, is kind of that anxiety feeling in your sternum, like, oh no, I'm about to be separated from alcohol. I can't, I can't drink anymore, or something like that. Um, and then diagnose those thoughts, and compare them to most 92% of the other people who is just a beverage who can live without the alcohol, the drink.
Yeah. All right. And then if somebody feels that and then they think they want to get help, what would you tell them?
There are so many resources that they can plug into. There's the spiritual based programs like I started out in. So, recovery ministries. There's also counseling. There's inpatient, outpatient. If a person is not active binge drinking or showing signs of withdrawal, then inpatient might not be that stage. You can always do outpatient treatment, or you can go to AA or NA. It's free, it's open to anybody. And those 12 steps that we use as a guideline or a suggestion as a recovery, you don't necessarily have to have a substance abuse issue to receive something beneficial and cathartic
Mm.
from that. It's about bettering your life is all that is. So all are welcome. If you even think you have a problem, just come on in, say hi.
Yeah.
There's an app on the phone called Meeting Finder, has a little blue chair emblem on it, and they can use that to type in any zip code wherever they are, and it'll show all the list of all the meetings of AA
Okay.
in their area.
Great. I'll put that in the notes here as well. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
I
It was my
appreciate
pleasure. I don't want to be
uh,
greedy, but it was all my pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have questions I ask kind of everybody at the end. So if I gave you $250,000 to do something in our community by the end of the day, what would you do with it?
Oh goodness, that's a good question. There are a lot of resources that helped me and other people as well in the recovery community. So I would definitely look into refunding some of those. Like the Stronghold will help you out if you're going to school or if you need clothes. There's any of the recovery treatment facilities, TWC, Best Care. Um, yeah, there's just all kinds of the mission, there's all kinds of things that can use funding to help people who are in a crisis. So with clothing, food, housing, money for books for school, all kinds of things I was able to plug into. I would like to refund those resources.
Great. Do you have a role model?
I do. When it comes to counseling, there is a guy who works at the CRC in Grants Pass. He's the only drug and alcohol counselor on staff there. I don't know if I'll just say his name, but yeah,
If
he's
you'd like to, you can, but you don't have to.
his name's Daniel. Daniel, if you're watching.
Okay. A good guy.
Yeah,
Helped you a lot, it
he
sounds
did.
like.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. What would your perfect day in Klamath look like? If you were just going to have a day for fun, what would you do in Klamath?
Probably something outside. It's been nice lately. So whether it be a hike or like playing some frisbee golf, definitely something outside. The weather here is really weird. It'll drop on us on a dime. So while the weather is nice, I always like to get in some good hiking and some disc golf.
Do you have a favorite trail?
I don't. I haven't done many trails here. What I would like to do really one day is to do Table Rock.
Oh, yeah,
Just
over
haven't
by
found any
Medford.
yeah, just haven't found anybody to go with me yet, but
Yeah,
timing will happen with that.
nice. Well, I really appreciate your time and good luck with what you're doing and stay in there.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for having me. It was my
Yeah,
pleasure.
very good. And thank you to our producer, 40 Deuce Films.